Hey everybody, and welcome to the show. I'm James, that's Katie, and that makes this the first ever episode 42 of Cloud Control. And you know, Kate, I got a little story to tell you at the start of the show. So I recently sold my old car and luckily traded that and managed to get a new one, whatever. That's not part of the story. Point is, when you sell a car, right, you've had this car for a long time. I've had it for like 7 years.
Yeah.
Try and clear everything out of it. And, you know, you find little things you've lost. Like I found a pair of sunglasses. I was so happy. You know, actually, our brother did for me. He found them. And I was like,
I remember when you lost those like a year ago.
Exactly. Yeah, it was great. Got them back. Checked the glove box, you know, all the little nooks and crannies. Except there's one place, Kate, in a car where it's very unlikely you'll think about it. And where would you say is the last place you would check if you had a car, say, from, you know, that you were checking?
Did your car have one of those like cigarette thingies? Like those like little
okay. Yeah.
circles?
Well, it did, but
you would never open those to save like ever.
This is true. I don't know why I'm making such a game of this. The place that we forgot to check or to take note of when we were checking the car for anything of mine was pressing eject on the CD player, because today I found in a different place in my house the cardboard covering for my Persona 5 CD soundtrack from my Persona 5 Royal limited edition, whatever, collector's edition thing. And I'm pretty sure the CD was in my car and it's now been inherited by the lucky purchaser because, God. What a soundtrack.
That person better appreciate it. That is like one of the best soundtracks of all time. If I bought a car and the Persona CD was in there, I would like tell everyone I know every day for the next like 3 years. Like I'd be so excited. Like what a lottery win.
I know. It would honestly seem like something good was going to happen in your life. You know, it would be an omen.
Yeah. It would be a good omen. I was thinking like what would have been in mine, and I remember when I sold my car most recently, I took out my Metallica CD from the CD drive. I was a step ahead of you.
I should have consulted with you before this. I've made a grave mistake.
It was a good CD, but it wasn't even as high of a risk as Persona, I would say.
Anyway, now I have a nice cardboard CD holder for something else in the future. But yeah, that's I guess I did a good deed, sort of, you know.
You should like burn the CD like we used to, like back in like the LimeWire days. You should burn the CD and just like in Sharpie write all the names of the Persona tracks on it. It's like clearly like some shitty like homemade not real version.
I'll get on it one day. We'll see. The problem is now my computer doesn't have a CD drive, you know. This is the whole nother. This is just what happens, you know. Things get taken out. Whatever. Anyway, that's my sad story, but I did a good deed, so I guess I'm okay with it. Welcome to the show, everybody. Today we've got a mishmash of things to talk about. There was a new trailer for Elden Ring's DLC, and so we're going to have to start the show off with that. And then we'll talk about a bunch of games later. We kind of have, I think, like 3 or 4, maybe even 5 games we'll talk about, depending how much time we got left. We've been playing a bunch of stuff, so we'll get to that in a little bit. But how could we not start the show off with letting Kate talk about the new Elden Ring Shadows of the Erdtree trailer? Yeah, God. I mean, I watched it. The graphics are damn cool. You know, there's like that.
Oh my God.
What do you have to say about this trailer? It looked very cool.
I mean, I'm actually curious to hear what you have to say, because obviously this is a big deal to me. Like I woke up on the 21st and I knew exactly what day it was. I didn't know they were going to drop a trailer, but I woke up on May 21st and I was like, it's a month till Shadow of the Erdtree, and I was so excited. I like told everyone, I was like, guys, happy Shadow of the Erdtree, a month away day. It was like a date in my mind. And then after I had put that out to my like, you know, people on Discord and friends and whatnot, someone responded, they're like, oh, did you watch the trailer then? And I had been up at like 6:30 to go to school, and I didn't know there was a trailer. And then I spent the rest of my day like buzzing, like I can't wait to get home. I gotta watch this Elden Ring trailer. They dropped it like 3 hours after I was so excited. It was a month till Elden Ring Day. And it didn't disappoint. Like this this was a cool as hell trailer. Like FromSoft dropped this, didn't explain. Who knows what's really going on? Like, you know, I have not unpacked all of the lore. I don't know if I will until I get to play it. But like, it is such a treat. Like their visual style for this game is just immaculate. Like I don't know what to call the like gothic, like I don't know, like dark but also like
It's
bright gold and like
Yeah,
oh.
I think it's kind of funny. Like since we've been playing a lot of Diablo 4 recently together, I've almost
Mhm.
gotten. I know it's not quite the same. Obviously, this is way more pretty, and the scale is just ridiculous. But some of the character designs and sort of the environments could almost be like Diablo a little bit. And I kind of have that energy from it,
Yeah.
especially this like new lady, whoever she is, in this trailer. She's very, very cool. She even reminds me of Lilith from Diablo a little bit, like in her design, just that red kind of highlight on her. Um, yeah, this trailer was absolutely beautiful, though. It might be one of the prettiest I've ever seen. All CGI, though, unfortunately. I wish we could have seen some gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, that is fair. That's true. The one kind of saving grace is like I feel like Elden Ring, based on how like grand and magnificent the base game was, I feel like seeing these like huge sweeping vistas in the trailer and like I've got my video paused on that scene where like the castle is like rising and then you rise above the castle and the tree is just like bent and broken and hanging over top and just like the scale of that image is like shocking. But at the same time, like it's Elden Ring, so if any game is gonna deliver on feeling like the scale is that ridiculously like over the top massive, I feel like it's Elden Ring. Like thinking of the first time you go down in that elevator and then you're in that like huge underground area and just how like small you continue to feel as you keep playing and the world keeps expanding. So like yeah, this is probably just what the game is gonna look like. But you're
Yeah.
right. In CGI, some in-game stuff would have been cool, but it technically is a story trailer, and fair enough.
Yeah, no, fair. I mean, fair enough. But I mean, that's the one thing I would have liked to see. I think it's interesting you make this point about how impressive the first game's scale was, because you're right. Like, I think there's arguably some games that can do scale on it in a different way. Like I remember playing like
Hmm.
some of the God of War games. Even the scale on those fights is
Yeah,
really crazy. Like, but this game, like you say, the map specifically is kind of what the
yeah,
scale surprises you with. I'm curious to see how they follow that up in the DLC. Like, there's no way this will be as big as the main game. Like, that seems a little crazy. I wonder how much size it actually will add, and like, how will they follow up that type of surprise? Because people's expectations now are like, oh, we're gonna have this massive place. I would imagine, right? And I wonder, like, if they're able to continually surprise in that way, or what that looks like. It reminds me kind of people, the discourse around like how will Breath of the Wild sequel kind of surpass what the original did. And now I
hmm
know this isn't a full game, but I just wonder what will the twist be, or what will how will it grapple with those huge expectations that are now on it because of the amazing quality and size of the
yeah,
first game. I think it's going to be
yeah.
interesting to see the reception on that.
I agree. I think so. Luckily, so back in February, um, Miyazaki did a big interview and kind of answered some questions regarding the DLC. So we got a lot of information there. And I think one of the questions was like, yeah, like what how big is this DLC going to be? Because From Software like is known for having pretty big expansive DLCs. Like they're usually quite large areas. They usually like add like 6 or 7 new bosses. Like they're usually quite substantial. And so people are like, yeah, Elden Ring is kind of a weird question mark now. The game style is different. Like what's going on? And so I think he answered, I've got up here, he said it's probably comparable, if not larger, to the area of Limgrave from the base game. So if you think of that like first like massive map
Hmm.
area that you get at the start of the game, which is quite like substantial. So about that, but then also I'm imagining there's going to be some of the like the legacy dungeons. I don't know if they specified how many, but there will be those like yeah, so he said the map is going to be about that size, and then it's going to be structured in a similar way with the open areas, and then large scale legacy dungeons, and then also medium and small scale legacy dungeons as well. So you're going to
Hmm.
have that like massive map, and then also the like something like Stormvale Castle kind of idea where you go in those like tighter, more like traditional kind of areas, and like I feel like that could be a lot
It sounds like a
of
lot,
things to
honestly. Yeah,
play.
sounds like a lot, and I'm
Yeah,
glad he came out and like talked about some of these questions. I feel like that's where so many games fall on their face because the
yeah,
huge hardcore fans get their hearts set on something, and then that doesn't end up being what they get, and they just hate it, right? And I think he sounds like he really understands the hardcore fan base of his games, and I think that's great to answer those questions.
yeah, absolutely, and it's just really nice. Like you said, like I think a lot of things about is like expectations and setup, and that's kind of the problem with like having these like big, amazing, like beautiful, especially full CGI trailers, like you mentioned, and then it's like it doesn't always like live up to that expectation, whether or not the expectation that you come into it is like fair or not. Like sometimes,
Well, the
yes,
internet
sometimes
hype
kind
machine
of
just
build it up.
sweeps people away like rapids in a
Yeah,
swiftly moving river, like people get
exactly.
caught up.
Exactly. It's one of those things that like even if they do maybe objectively a good job at kind of like selling or like showing you what you're going to be sold, it doesn't mean that people aren't going to like completely run away with it. Like I think of something like the Suicide Squad, right? And there was a
Hmm.
lot of like controversy about that game, and I remember seeing a lot of things coming out about it, and everyone's like, this game is like, this game has problems. Like there's not really any like enough content. Like it was kind of clear from the initial outset of that game coming out, like kind of what the flaws would be, and then people were like, no, it's gonna be, and then some people were like so sure it was gonna be like great and
Oh my
exactly what they
god,
wanted.
I don't know where you're reading your. I never heard anyone saying that. Where the hell are you going on the
Yeah,
internet?
I saw like a few things of
Jeez.
it, and it was like, like you just, I know you want it to be good, but just like be a little critical maybe. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I'm just trying to look. I don't know if he said how many bosses are gonna be in it, but like
Yeah, I was gonna ask you. Do you know like if there's obviously there'll be new bosses and weapons and stuff like that? Do you know of any other things that are coming to the game, or have they teased anything like
so
that?
there's gonna be I'm trying to think. I know I read this. I should have maybe refreshed on this article, but there's definitely going to be like a ridiculous amount of new weapons. Like I remember reading the number and thinking like you only can really use like a couple weapons per playthrough. Like you don't need to add 70 more weapons, guys. Like it's
Yeah.
okay. And then there's also going to be some like new type of resource that's going to interact like distinctly with the new area. So there's going to be like a whole new kind of like mechanic or thing like involved in the DLC too. So it isn't just necessarily going to be like more of the same, but also there's going to be like a new element to playing the game, whether that's tied into the crafting system that the game already has. I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, so apparently like they've done quite a bit
Hmm.
to like add to the game.
And
Um,
and do you know like is this the type of DLC that you can play at any time, or do you have to play it after a certain point of the main game, or is that kind of ambiguous? Because I feel
so
like it must be playable, right? The game is so long, so many people wouldn't have finished it.
yeah, so I think from what I assume and based on the other DLCs is that you're pretty flexible in when you go to them, but they usually tend to be quite challenging. So you could, in true From Software fashion, I'm sure you'll definitely be able to go there right away if you really want to, but you are gonna sorely get your ass handed to you unless you're the kind of person that wants to play the game, naked with a club at level 1 the entire time, which I'm sure you can absolutely figure out a way to do it. But I think he mentioned he did talk about the difficulty because that's obviously something that comes up in every single interview that Miyazaki does. It's like, please talk about the
It's a
difficulty.
bit tiresome, to be honest. Like we should just all
And
shut up about it, I think.
he's got a great answer, but at this point,
Yeah.
like maybe there are some other
It's like
questions
it's
that
like interviewing
could
Miyamoto about a Mario game. It's like, well, will there be jumping in this game? Like, come on, like what a stupid question.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So He gave the same kind of answer he always gives of like, our approach to difficulty isn't to make it hard for the sake of being hard. We want our players to have a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment when they overcome a boss, da 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 da. We want you to be able to use like a breadth of strategies and freedom in how you approach the encounter. And, if it's challenging, you can come back later with a new way to circumvent it and da da da, kind
It's
of
really
like all
written
the
in a
big
very
philosophy.
encouraging way.
I mean, he's so positive about it, which is the funniest thing. Like, he genuinely is just like, yeah, I did this for you guys. Like, have fun. um, but I think he did specify that there's going to be some optional bosses that are quite difficult, and he compared it to Melania, which is the boss that's considered definitely the most difficult in the base game. And so, yeah, he said there's going to be bosses on that same kind of level, and there's definitely going to be challenge. So I assume it is something that will definitely be maybe like a later game kind of
Mm.
feel. But it's a great reason to pick the game back up and maybe finish it if you didn't quite get around to it.
See, here's the thing. I ain't going back. It's been too long. I forgot everything, like I'm so out of practice. I had 45 hours with the game. I'm good. It's
Yeah.
too bad that
You
I
know what?
can't
That's a
jump into the
long time though.
DLC. It's too bad that I probably can't jump into the DLC at the current level that I'm at, because it would be
Mhm.
cool to check it out, but I don't really feel like getting further in the main game because it would require like hours of honing myself again just to go and then
Yeah.
play the DLC. Like I don't have 40 hours to do all that. It's too bad, really.
Yeah,
But
that's fair. That was kind of the blessing and the curse of Elden Ring, is that in some ways it was a little more accessible because you had a bit more freedom in how you wanted to approach it
mhm.
than the
Which I
previous
loved. I
game.
think that's the reason I played
Yeah,
45 hours. But then on the flip side,
exactly.
it's now like, oh my
Exactly.
God, it's so
But
much to
on
go
the flip
back to.
side, 45 hours would have been completing one of the previous games, not you've done a maybe almost a quarter. So, yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's
an interesting thing, but I'm really
yeah.
interested to see. I'm assuming the what's going to happen is people will love the DLC and it will be like a huge success. But it's always interesting to see how a big game follows up what it came out with originally.
Yeah, I agree, and like I'm so excited. I mean, obviously I'm extremely biased when it comes to From Software, but I also think that they have a lot of reason to put a lot of like faith in what they put out. And for two reasons is that everything they've done is, in the last like
Hmm
20 years has been extreme quality. I mean, how do you ship a game like Elden Ring and it doesn't really have very many big issues at the start, and it just, like no one really had anything,
hmm
like people were just blown away. Like it was just a masterpiece immediately and everybody loved it. And,
Yeah.
it delivered on its promise, probably more than anyone even expected. And then as far as DLCs go, they're generally considered the best parts of the games a lot of the time. They're really, really highly regarded as far as every single entry. But the biggest thing that makes me really confident about DLCs from Software is that they didn't make one for Sekiro. It's the only game that didn't get a DLC. And when Miyazaki was interviewed as to why, he said because everyone really wanted one and people were expecting it because that was the trend of their release schedule. And he said, he's like, I think I told everything I had to tell in the game, and I kind of feel like it's complete. There's nothing I really want to add to it. And so that gives me the impression, like, that game won Game of the Year. It would have sold as many DLC copies as people would
hmm
have been
Yeah.
capable of buying. And I think that kind of philosophy is really good of like we didn't make one because we didn't have something we really wanted to make and we wanted to move on to the next thing. So that implies to me at least that like Elden Ring, they had something else that they wanted to tell within the story or within like the combat system or just like another area in the world that didn't quite make it into the first game or some kind of like reason that was game first and like money second. Although
hmm
I'm sure they're going to
Yeah. Well, I
enjoy
mean, they
the
publish through
spoils
Bandai
from the
Namco. Like,
DLC.
there's gonna be money considerations. They're not a perfect,
Yeah,
everything's a company.
of
But I know
course.
what you're saying. Like, they definitely have a great track record, and I would trust them more than pretty much any company that comes to mind in terms of like the quality of what they'll follow up with.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, yeah, even still, Cyberpunk happened. So I'm not saying that's
Yeah,
going to happen for this. I just think the drama of like following these things as
yeah,
an outsider is very interesting, is the point I'm trying
yeah,
to get across.
absolutely.
I
It's
sincerely
not.
hope that you love this DLC. and
Yeah,
that everyone
nothing
does.
ever is a 1,000% slam dunk, but if I had to put any money on anything being a slam dunk, it would be this. And like, it's been like 2 years since the game came out. They've had a lot of time. They've been working on it. They made this like amazing trailer. Like, think of the shot at the end with like all the characters like kneeling in front of that like new version of the Grace with the
I was gonna
tree in
ask
the
you that
background. And like,
looked different. That light,
yeah,
what's it called? The grace. It looked different. The symbol, like that must mean something, right?
yeah, it definitely does. So I think the character that's big in this DLC is a character who's like important to the lore but was absent in the base game. So this is going to be exploring their story in like this really horrible, like ridiculous incest drama family of like the
It sounds like
gods
Final
of
Fantasy.
old. Yeah, it's yeah, you can see a little bit of the George R. R. Martin inspiration coming into it a little bit too, but I just like the thing that gets me in this trailer is like first of all, these characters are so cool. Like the design on all of them is so unique and interesting. But it's that like it's the Erdtree in the background of every shot, and I think of like playing the original game and like you can see it and it's just like this like marker on the horizon at all times. And then when you finally like get closer and closer to it as you're playing, and then there's a lot of theories about this one. It looks very like a corrupted version of that Erdtree, and so
Hmm.
it definitely raises a lot of interesting questions. And I'm very torn between like watching the 600 hours of YouTube about
Don't
breaking
do
it
it. Don't do it.
down. I know.
Be
I think I'm
pure.
gonna play it for myself and then come to YouTube after with all of my questions.
Exactly. Yeah. I think
Yeah,
that's the way to go. But
I
hey, play
think
however
so.
you want. Yeah, I guess I don't know what more I could add to this. The I mean, I'm just going off the visuals and the sound and the character design
Mhm.
and everything. I think it's not like knocking it out of the park. Honestly, like the regular game did, exactly the same thing. And yeah, just hoping for more of the same for everyone who's a fan of the game.
Mhm.
Kate, I have to ask, do you have any final thoughts on this before we inevitably will talk about it a lot in the future after
Uh,
release? So,
yeah.
where will you leave us?
I think I want to leave us all just sitting in the mystery of like what the heck is going on because there's some theories, there's some thoughts, there's a lot of little things to pick out on. But I kind of like this trailer is sort of like it reminds me of when a Kojima trailer comes out and you're like, I understand less about this world now that I've seen this trailer.
That's a great
And
analogy.
I feel like it's got a little bit of that to it. Like it definitely if you kind of care about the lore and the story, it definitely piques some interest. But then also, it's just the coolest thing to look at. And like the design at the end of like sitting on the throne is super cool. And I want to shout out that they've got like that guy with like the dumb helmet doing the big like circle gesture at the end. It's like really dumb and funny. And finally, the collector's edition with like the art book. I want that so badly. Like so badly. But yeah, no, I think we'll leave the mystery for now. It will be less than a month away, and I will probably talk about it too much at that point. So I'll
There we
save it.
go. Okay, well, there you have it, folks. Let's move along and talk about some video games. We have a bunch of quick hits today of different things we've either talked about before or not. Let's just get started. There's a game online that you may or may not have heard of. You'll know Kate and I are lifelong Pokemon enthusiasts. And there's a new game out, PokeRogue. It's kind of one of those internet ROM emulator games in a certain way. So if Nintendo's listening or you know someone at Nintendo, don't tell them about this. It'll cease to exist quicker than you can snap your fingers, probably. But this is a cool roguelike. Now, admittedly, you've played a lot more than me, Kate, but this is like the first, I think it's up to Gen 5 of Pokemon, and you kind of go through this. Is
No,
it all the
it has
gens?
everything. Yeah, it has
Oh,
all the gens in it, which I don't know if any game has ever had all the
amazing.
gens in
Honestly.
it.
Pokemon Home,
Amazing.
that's the only one. But yeah,
Yeah.
you go through and you just fight a series of battles. There's no map. You're not a trainer walking around. You just get right into it. You do a few battles against some wild Pokemon, and then you get to like a trainer battle. And through this whole time, after every battle, you're getting a certain currency, or you can use items to heal your guys. You can catch new Pokemon as you're going, and there's certain benefits to leveling them up, and you can select them in later runs. There's a huge Pokedex to fill out. Man, this is a game I really should play more of because it's like this is the roguelike for me, you know. But yeah, it's very cool. What do you think?
It's just so simple is like the best thing about it. Like it's just simple and it's just Pokemon. And there's an element of like that kind of like completionist that wants to fill out the Pokedex, but it's also like exciting. Like so it's I guess like 200 floors is the goal of the game, is to get to floor 200 and then win that last battle. And I think every 10th floor is like a milestone floor, and it's kind of like a boss battle, whether that's like one Pokemon with just a bigger health bar that you have to take down, or it's like a trainer, it could be your rival, something like that. And then you get like a heal, and then you have to do 10 more floors and you get that heal. So that's kind of like the loop that it goes through. But it's like kind of tough at first because like you don't get access to healing outside of those 10 floors, and like when you're level 5 and you're like you got Pidgey and it's like fighting a
You've got Pidgey.
Rattata and you get like crit by the Rattata, like what's your Pidgey gonna do for the next 9 floors?
Yeah,
um
it can get challenging, and I was going pretty well for a certain point, and then I ran into a trainer that just had something that was good against all my Pokemon. And the other thing too is it's not the battle style is like set, so it doesn't tell you your opponent's about to switch in their Blastoise. Would you like to change out
mhm.
your Charizard? And it wouldn't ask you that. You just have to go into the battle, see what happens, and like whatever
Yeah,
comes out next, you got to deal
and
with it, and it makes it way
and they're
harder.
pretty smart. Like they will swap out and try to like get an advantage. They're not just gonna leave their like guy who's super effective against you to just take it, you know? Um, so yeah, it's pretty tough. So the kind of big complexity comes in with that, and then also in between, you get a store after every floor, and you get to take one thing for free, and it's kind of at random. So if you really want to revive and you just have like balls and potions, well, too bad. Um, and then there's also like a set store where you can buy something, but you can run out of currency very easily if you're like having to buy like healing after every single battle. So it definitely has like an element of like it's actually quite difficult to get through even if you're pretty like competent at Pokemon. But it's also like that's kind of what makes it fun as a roguelike, I guess, is that like you keep trying new runs with different Pokemon, and like it goes to different areas. So like maybe you went to like the swamp area and it's got a lot of like water and poison type Pokemon, and that's not necessarily great for you every run, but some runs you're like, that's perfect. I'm so good against water and poison, and then you can kind of speed through that area and like keep leveling up and keep making it higher and higher every challenge. Um,
Yeah, and I seem to think there's like Pokemon fusion and stuff in this as well, right? Or some different made up Pokemon, or am I thinking of something else?
I don't think so. Not that I've
No.
seen. I
Okay.
think it's just got like the full, like it's pretty authentic. I think maybe they did a few things for changing like what level up moves everything
Mm.
learns, because the level cap is now 200 instead of 100, so they slightly
Yeah, well, that's the other thing I
adjusted
like about the
that.
game is they seem to have adjusted a lot of Pokemon's level up
Mm-hmm.
move sets because I started with Bulbasaur on my team when I played,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a great choice always. But instead of learning, Leech Seed and then Sunspore and a bunch of stuff, like he gets Vine Whip right away. And it makes such a difference to have something you can actually hit guys with. And you don't seem to be learning as many of the sort of, placeholder moves that you would normally get in
Yeah.
the early stages of Pokemon until you sort of get those more elemental moves and whatnot. So I really think that's cool because it increases the roster by so many more Pokemon you'll actually want to use. Like what will Beedrill actually have now? Can I actually use it? Because it's always been cool as hell, but I don't want to use
Mm-hmm.
Poison Sting until level 53 when it learns like some other shitty, barely
Yeah.
any better move. Like that's the way it is with Beedrill. But now maybe he's
Yeah.
cool. So I think that's
Yeah.
exciting too, and it breathes life
Now,
into like the more of the roster.
yeah, now he's twin needling so much quicker. Um, but yeah, I think that is probably the main aspect that has kind of got me to adopt it as like my cozy game recently, is that like it's like the best part about Pokemon are the Pokemon. Like I don't think that's a
Hmm.
hot take. Like that is by far what makes it the most interesting element of the franchise, but you really don't get to interact with very many Pokemon when you play Pokemon, right? Like you have a team of 6, you're pretty encouraged to keep them the same because they're the ones leveling up, and occasionally you swap something out. But like your roster is very small, depend like considering like how many Pokemon there are. Maybe a little better in the new one because it's easier to they get experience in the box now and it's easier to swap your team out. But still, I feel like the amount of Pokemon that you physically interact with is limited. But in this game, because it's a roguelike, you're constantly swapping your team out as you're catching things along the run. So I found that like one of the best strategies to use was like if a Pokemon's dead, you can spend a lot of your money on reviving it. Or you just catch a new Pokemon, and when you do that, it's like, would you like to swap it out for something in your party? And you're like, well, this Hypno I just caught has 6 health and he's paralyzed, but my like Venomoth is dead. So bye Venomoth, you're a Hypno now.
Big
And
upgrade
like
there.
exactly. And so you're also kind of limited in what you're able to catch at any time. So sometimes like filling that like type hole that you're missing is not easy to do. And so I've noticed I've used a lot of Pokemon I would never have used before, but that's been really fun and it's exciting to like see what kind of like comes around the corner is like the
Yeah,
next
yeah.
thing
See, we're
we're
on the
gonna
same
find.
page with this. We're on the same page with this.
Mm-hmm.
I really need to play more. I'll say like my experience
Mm-hmm.
wasn't the greatest with the game when I did play because I was playing on my phone and I don't know what it was, but you know the like the hitboxes on the controls, it looks nice. Like it looks like kind of a Game Boy controller and like they did a good job designing it. But the hitbox is kind of weird. Like I was trying to click like around the menu and I would just have to like I actually had to look at my thumb and like I don't like having to fiddle with the controls. I feel like someone who's never played a game before. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but like I should know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And like I'm gonna try it on the computer next time. I think it'll be
Yeah.
maybe a little easier. And plus, like some
Yeah.
reading some of the stats and everything too. Like you can really click into like extra menus in this. You can see
Mm-hmm.
like stat boosts, and it's really helpful stuff. But on the phone screen, I just found it kind of like, ooh, too small, not good.
That's fair. There's a lot of information on the screen, especially with the shop, and as the shop gets bigger and bigger and more items are added to it, like they get
Mm-hmm.
progressively more small to fit everything on the screen. So I can see that. It is in browser, which is kind of cool. So you can easily play it on a phone or you can play it anywhere on your computer, and it's just like a free account that you make, and then you can cross any of the platforms. So I've been most of my playing I've done on my computer actually with my PlayStation controller. So like
Hell yeah,
it's so comfy to just play it that way.
that's
But
cool.
yeah, I think there's one other cool thing about the game that's maybe worth mentioning, and I don't know how much it really influences the run because I feel like you ditch a lot of your crappy Pokemon early anyway. But the like how you build your team to start is kind of cool. So all the starters from each gen are just unlocked by default. And then whenever you catch a Pokemon, it's now unlocked to start with in a run. And then there's also like this like gotcha system, which sounds really horrible, but there's no actual like way to spend money in the game, so it's not trying to rip you off. And then it's just like when you defeat gym leaders, you get little like tokens that you can use on the machines and it'll pop out like eggs that hatch. So like it's pretty okay Pokemon, and it's
Hmm.
not as bad as it sounds.
I haven't done that yet. I should do that.
Oh, you should do it. Yeah, there's like a few. There's like you can kind of choose if you want like more skewed to higher chance of legendary or like higher chance of shiny or like higher chance of them having like a unique move or something like that.
Hmm.
So it's kind of fun. And
See,
they
I
hatch
like those
eggs.
things if they're not
Yeah,
paid for. You know, like
yeah,
it's
exactly.
fun.
It's just like an extra way of getting like other Pokemon you wouldn't necessarily like run into. And like I've definitely like I think the odds are pretty good. Like I have a couple shinies. I got like Lugia the other day when I was playing. Like you get some cool stuff. I have like metal. I have the Magmite or like
Mm-hmm.
Magneton, but he's got like the legs. He's like iron treads or something. I got
Oh
that
yeah,
guy.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's pretty cool. And then when you build your team, you get 10 points to spend, and each Pokemon costs a different amount of points. So you could buy like a legendary who might be like 7 or 8 points, and that's basically all of your available roster. And then you could buy like a couple 1 point guys, or you could spend your points a little more evenly and have like 3 3 like 4 or something. And so I guess it's kind of supposed to be like balanced. Like Sunkern is like a
Mm-hmm.
1, he costs only 1 to put on, and then most of the starters cost 3 or something, and then you know legendaries are like yeah 7ish. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of fun. It's kind of fun to go in and build your squad, but then I feel like if you take like Sunkern, you're just gonna ditch him for something else anyway.
Yeah.
So
It's like one of those things online, like you get $10 to build your perfect team. Like who do you pick? Basically.
Yeah, it's
It's pretty
exactly
fun.
like that. So it's not very impactful to the run, but there is something kind of pleasing about it when you're like, oh, I really want to. I just got Fampy. I really want to start with Fampy, and then you're like, okay, Fampy cost this many points, and then you're like going through, and you're like, I've got 2 points left. Like, who cost 2 points? I don't know. I really like that for whatever reason. It lights up some neurons in
Yeah,
my
totally,
brain that
totally.
are fired to just want to like look at Pokemon all day.
When you get tired of your card binder, you can then go to PokeRogue and flip through the pages.
Exactly, exactly. And then by that time, my card binder would be ready to be refreshed. So,
Okay, next game, next game. Everyone go play PokeRogue though. It's really fun. It's free. You'll like it.
mhm.
Okay, so I was playing a little game on my phone the other day. Speaking of stuff, I guess it's a mobile episode kind of for me. I played the first little bit of Assemble with Care, and this was a game that I had installed a little while ago. It was like a free trial of the first little bit, so I thought like I've heard about this before. May as well check it out. It's sort of a fun little slice of life game. You're this girl. You move to a new city, and your job is you work as a restorer. So she basically like just fixes different things for people, and the game sort of has this narrative that she's helping meet people in the town and getting to know them, learning their problems, and then helping them fix up whatever their item is of choice. It's got a really cool minimalist art style. When you're scrolling through the story, it looks really nice. Like you kind of just scroll down
Mhm.
on mobile. There's words that go along. The game is narrated as the words flash by the screen. You see little pictures stuck in there as well, and you're just scrolling almost like you'd scroll through a social media feed down the story, and it's kind of reading as you go. It looks really nice, like really bold colors. Um, really like the
It almost
art.
has like a very like lo-fi beat kind of
Totally,
look
yeah,
to it, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah. Really
Or like
cool
kind of
look.
like Florence mixed with unpacking.
Yeah, I can see that actually. The kind of like the thicker lines of Florence, but then unpacking
hmm
maybe more the color scheme.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the UI is really interesting too. Like it's very minimal. There's kind of notches on the side of the story screen where you can see what page of the this current chapter you're on. I almost missed it the first time that I played, so it might almost be like a little too small, but at the same time, it really looks cool, and I think it really works if you know it's there. And you same thing, but like horizontally as you're going through chapters, you're scrolling through. It almost looks like the tuning of like a really old radio or something when you'd spin the knob on it and the thing would go
hmm
across. It's really eye catching anyway. Um, Unfortunately, I didn't really find the story from what I read was too engaging, and that's like I don't know. It's on the surface going to a new town and kind of meeting people. It's one of those nice slice of life games, like I said, like the mail delivery one that I had played. I forget what it's called now, or like something like Stardew
Yeah.
Valley. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, this is a much smaller scale. It's a mobile kind of experience, and I don't know. I just found kind of the situations and the people. I didn't really care for it. I kind of wasn't too interested, and I wasn't I didn't feel the hook to want to know who more of the people in this game were going to be and what their problems might be and how they interact. But the puzzles themselves, I actually thought were pretty cool. I fixed a few different things, so you're kind of displayed with whatever the item is. One of the things was like an old rotary phone, and it wasn't working, so I had to. The phone kind of starts on this table, and you can pick up different things. You can pick up the phone or a screwdriver or some different tools that you have around, and you sort of you'll pick one up and then you'll hover another one over it until you think it can fit in, and there'll be a little interaction icon you'll get. So like if you hover a screwdriver over top of the screws on the bottom, it'll sort of magnet on there and then flip around, and then you go to swipe your thumb and like spin the screwdriver. It's very tactile, and you really feel like you're performing all of the actions of what it would be like to then flip the phone back over and lift off the top, and you're like unscrewing different things inside and connecting little tubes. It's a cool experience, and I think the controls themselves are really fun on mobile, just because you feel like in a way it's more one to one in terms of what you're
It's
doing.
tangible.
Yeah,
Yeah. I wonder how it would feel like. I know it's not probably not the scope of the game, but I feel like on the PS5 controller, it could probably be kind of cool too, because it would like, I don't know, maybe give you like the weight of some of these things, or like if one of them like I don't know, if like you're spinning like a cassette back, it might like spin a little bit or
Well,
something.
you do spin a cassette back with a pencil actually in this game, so that's
That
kind of how it starts. It's your
is totally the vibe
yeah.
of this game.
Yeah, 100%. When it starts, the game's like it's better with headphones, and there's this cassette player on the screen, and you take the
Mhm,
cassette, you slide it into the player, you shut the thing, and then it's like this game's better with headphones. You plug your headphones in,
mhm.
it goes back to the cassette player, but now there's like a headphone wire like leading from the cassette player off the screen as if it's like attached to you as you're doing it
That
in real life. It's
that is
it's
so
very cool.
incredibly cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I was pretty blown away with like that opening. I think that hook actually was my
Yeah,
favorite part of the game, and that sounds like
yeah.
that sounds
I
really
love
like
when games
damning, I
kind of
guess,
like
but
break the fourth wall a little bit like that. Like that is so cool.
yeah, it was cool. But yeah, I fixed like a rotary phone. I fixed this circuit board and like I think it was a remote control or something. You had to like unplug and get a new one. I had a little bit of issue where like if you can imagine on your phone, you kind of have I think there's a couple of menu buttons at the bottom. In the middle of the screen is largely where you're sort of manipulating these different broken items. Another one was there was a porcelain doll and it was smashed up and I was just gluing all the pieces back together. But and then at the top you kind of have your tools section and you can click up there and get what you need or move something and put it out of the way. And there was a couple of times where the game was trying to give me a hint, but the hint would come down from the top and sort of block out some of the tools. So I don't know if that was an issue just on like the specific phone that I had or something, but I definitely was impacted by that. I was like trying to get this little screw out of a bowl that I'd taken out, and there's like this hint
Uh,
that's there, and I'm like, I know what I need to do, I just can't click it.
yeah.
And like, what am
Let's
I?
do
Yeah,
it.
so there was that. Definitely not perfect, but it's a pretty cool game. I like the puzzles quite a bit for like what I don't know. What am I trying to say? I like them quite a bit for how they let you interact with all the pieces and how specific they are. What I will say too, and another reason that I wouldn't say this was my favorite game was just because they're not really puzzles. Like there's not a lot to figure out. You can't really get anything wrong. You kind of just have to put things together until they happen to fit, even if you get kind of stuck.
Mhm.
So it's more like the experience for the sake of doing it, as if you're someone that really knows what you're doing versus trying to figure out like how these contraptions work. And maybe they get more complicated as the game goes on. Like I definitely didn't get to the end, but the way that it kind of it'll magnetize a screwdriver onto the screw, or like if you try and plug a tube into the wrong socket, it won't go in there. But then if it's the right one, it'll just stick in. Like you can't really mess it up. And I don't know, like it seems like an interesting concept for something that could even be more tricky. And you could have pieces laid around and it'll be like, okay, assemble this computer and then turn it on and see if it works. And if it doesn't, like, what do you do about it? I think that would be cool.
Because it very much could be like set up like a puzzle, right? Because like you have a set amount of
Hmm.
pieces, you need to put them in the right order in the right spot. Like that's just what a puzzle is. But like a more like tangible kind of like potentially like 3D puzzle, right?
Yeah. Anyway, I don't really have a ton more to say on it. I don't know if you've looked it up at all or if you've seen this game.
I have, yeah. I was just looking it up. It looks really good. It really reminds me, like, I like this new genre of cozy game. Like, it reminds me of like an unpacking or like a little to the left is another one I
Hmm.
want to play where
Hmm.
you're just sort of like
Florence.
tidying up things. Like, Florence is good. I think Florence is like very good story as opposed to like, it's got maybe some of the same kind of mechanics, but the story in Florence makes it like the best one. Although I really like the subtle story and unpacking, but like I just like
Hmm.
these kind of like I don't know. It's just nice to organize things sometimes, and it's nicer to do it in a nice, colorful, attractive video game with a nice soundtrack. And something about that is relaxing in a way that like going to organize your kitchen in real life is not.
Exactly.
And I would love to see some kind of like psychological study done on why these games are so appealing. Maybe it probably exists. This is gonna be my rabbit hole for the rest of the night now, but like why is it so nice to unpack a house without having to physically unpack a house?
I tell you what, I would like get a job at a moving company tomorrow if it could be doing these games, unpacking things and putting things
Yeah.
back together and all this stuff. I would be the best repairman out there. I'll tell you what, like I would repair
Right?
things all
But
day.
it's like, yeah, best repairman ever if I could do that for a
I mean,
living.
I
But
already
it's like,
played
oh,
20 hours of pressure washing simulator. Like
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, oh, the handle in the kitchen is kind of loose and I could fix it in 5 minutes, or it could just be loose for the next 3 years. Well, take your best guess which one it's gonna be. Like, um,
Man, that's true. That's so true. But
hmm
yeah, that I guess that's all I'll say on Assemble with Care. Cool little game. If you're looking for something on mobile, I wouldn't say it's a terrible choice, but I think recently on the show we've covered some really standout mobile games, and I wouldn't quite put this one on the same scale. Even like games like Solitarica is another one. There's
Yeah.
a great mobile game. Balatro coming to mobile soon. Like man, oh man, there you go. Slay the Spire. All the good hits. But yeah, Simple with
Mhm.
Care, kind of cool.
Shout out to Balatro. I played Big 2 with some friends the other day, and it involved like making poker hands, and I was like, "Oh good, I know how to make poker hands because of Balatro." So shout out
Amazing.
to Balatro for some real life skills that I acquired and were useful. Um, but that's maybe a good segue to kind of speak about like deck builders, because the game I've got, which is also kind of a good cozy game, but definitely a little more involved than the last two, is, and I'm gonna get this correct on the first try, it is the most like generic title for a video game ever, and I can never remember what it's called, but I will tell you now, it is called Astrea Six-Sided Oracles. Now, I'm going to leave you to take your best guess as to what that is a game about, because I feel like that could literally be anything. But if you guessed that it was a dice builder, then you were correct, and you probably cheated because no one would ever guess that. But it's awesome. It very much plays like imagine like a Slay the Spire kind of deck builder. It's exactly that kind of formula. But what's interesting is that it plays, instead of drafting cards into your deck, you draft dice, which is very, very interesting. And it's very overwhelming at first because instead of looking at a card that tells you what it does, you instead are looking at a die that has 6 sides and it has potentially different outcomes on each of its 6 sides. But it's very cool once you kind of get to learn the visual lingo of the game, because that's that's an insane amount of flexibility
Hmm.
in terms of the kind of like quote unquote deck that you can build. Um, so it's very cool. It's the same kind of idea as Slay the Spire. You kind of have a map where you pick where to go. It might be like a fight that will then give you like currency and more dice afterwards. It might be like a random encounter where you get to choose between a couple of options. It might be a type of store, like the standard kind of stuff. And then at the end of every map, there's a boss. You beat the run. But I was really impressed with this game. It is so clever with the dice, and it adds that little bit of like a twist on the formula that made it feel really fresh and unique, but still kind of like had the conventions that I'm familiar with, and that like scratch that itch for one of those like, Slay the Spire, Monster Train, like one of
Always
those.
looking for a new one of those.
Exactly,
Always.
exactly. And this was really good. So, what's cool about it is there's 6 different characters, and as you play the game, you unlock them in an order. And they all have different abilities. So there's this cool thing where you have a health bar, and all the enemies have a health bar.
Yeah, I was gonna
And
ask if
you,
you had health or mana or like how many
yeah.
dice can you play a turn? Is there like restrictions on that
So
kind of thing?
no, so you have whatever, however many dice, it's 6 or however many you start with at every turn. And you, at the beginning of the turn, is this really nice animation where everybody's dice roll at once. So your dice, the enemy's dice, it's just this big dice like rolling all over the screen, and then they slot into place where they're in your spot or they're in the enemy's spot. And so you could see what they've rolled and you can see what you've rolled. And then you play your turn out. So there's 3 different styles of dice. There's safe dice, where at least usually all, sometimes all but one of the sides are like good things. They might not all be as good as others. Like it might, for example, in a really simple case, be like do 1 damage to an enemy, do 2 damage, or maybe do 3 up to between 1 and 3. So rolling 1 is obviously worse than rolling 3, but like rolling a 1 is still doing something positive. And then there's balanced dice where they usually have 3 sides are good for you and 3 sides actively hurt you. And then you'll have risky dice, which will maybe be like 2 sides of the die are like fantastic, like really strong things to do for the turn. But then the other 4 are like harmful. And so you then have all the dice at your disposal and you choose how you assign them. So the health is kind of cool. It's like basically like a heal and a corrupt are the 2 things. And heal, you can play on yourself to heal you, and you can play on enemies to like damage them, because the idea is that like they've been corrupted and you're like bringing them back to being like healthy kind of thing. Like, they've been corrupted by some evil force and you make them, they're like, animals and stuff. And then, it's like in Sonic when you free them, you want to make them healthy again and then they can go back to the forest, whatever. The story is boring and it doesn't matter. But then it's kind of the opposite. So if you roll a dice and it's like, oh, deal 3 corruption, then that essentially either helps the enemy or you can use it to hurt yourself. And you can kind of pick and choose. So there's a lot of flexibility. Sometimes you're like, I really can't afford to hurt myself, so I'm gonna like buff the enemy with this dice, and that sucks, but like it's better than me dying right now.
So do you find now,
Mhm.
because it's dice and there's so many more possibilities of what you could get in your hand hypothetically than
Mhm.
something like Slay the Spire where you have a set deck of cards, you're going to draw one. But I feel like the
Mhm.
multiples of what you could get in this game are so many more exponentially larger. Do
Yeah.
you feel like there's way more reliance on chance in this game in comparison to Slay the Spire, or are there ways to kind of mitigate that?
So that is the clear potential pitfall of a system like this. However, I think they've done a really good job about allowing you to have a sense of control. So each character you choose has a set of like special abilities that they can use. There's one that is always available. You can use it every single turn. And it'll be usually tied to like kind of what the character is good at. And then your health bar has like abilities alongside it, and it corresponds to damage. So when you're at full health, you only have one available. But for ticks of health that you lose, it opens up that ability to be used. So even though you're sometimes hurting yourself, a benefit in that you've now unlocked like one of your class abilities to use that turn. And so sometimes you're like, wow, like I really want to use this thing. It like gives me a big shield or something. It's worth taking 1 damage to get then the shield of like 3 or 4, which is going to be way more useful. There's also, I think, almost every single character has a reroll ability, which is really helpful. And there's a lot of dice that you can pick up that allow you to reroll things. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes like that's really great, like especially if you have a risky dice and you rolled something poorly, you can try to roll it again. But what's really cool is you can also roll enemies dice again. So
Oh, cool.
if they rolled their best attack on their dice, instead of re-rolling yours, you might want to take theirs and roll it, and now suddenly they're not doing very much on their turn.
Wow. That
So
sounds like this would be a very fun like multiplayer game to play against each other. Because if
yeah,
I could see this being like a real board game where you're like rolling against each other. That sounds really fun. It's changing each other's
yeah,
dice around.
it honestly could be. I think it's actually in beta right now, so they're doing a lot of balancing. Like I didn't realize when I played it was in beta, because to me it felt really polished and really well put together. But that's definitely something that could be really cool and like maybe added to the game at some other point in time, and you could both just like pick a character and see how they come up against each other. Or maybe like, yeah, maybe they'd have like a set, deck that's already sort of pre-built out of dice. But yeah, it's really cool. There's a lot. I felt like I was usually pretty in control of kind of what I wanted to spec into. And then part of the shop, one of the shops you can go to spend your money is to upgrade your dice. And so how that works is you basically just like pick from the shop a side of a die that you want. So let's say it's like deal 3 damage to all enemies, for example, or like, do 2 dice rerolled or something. You buy the like dice side, and then you choose on which side you want to replace it. So your dice can start out a bit riskier, and then a lot of your upgrading is like, okay, well, I had this risky one that had 2 good things and then 4 things that sucked. but now one of them is I've replaced with something else good. So now it's half good and only half bad. And so that's kind of like, as much as upgrading to get new dice, there's a lot of upgrading of like making your dice just inherently better. So like there's like a crazy amount of customizing. It's flexible, but it also feels like you have control. Like it strikes this really good balance. And then all of the characters kind of have like their own mechanic, kind of like, yeah, think of like a Slay the Spire where the silent has like poison, and then they have a lot of like draw and discard, and like they kind of do things that the other characters can't do. These characters all have that. They have different mechanics. Like one of them has like a dodge that you could try to build up, so you might just dodge enemies' attacks. Another one has like the ability to turn a bad dice good. So if you roll the dice and it's like, I'm going to do 6 damage to myself, and then you just Uno reverso it, and you're like, I'm going to do
No,
6 damage
reverso.
to you. So you kind of like intentionally want to put like risky dice so that you could like reverse them, because you actually want to roll the bad stuff more than you want to roll the good stuff.
Hmm.
There's another character who like gets these like, you can get little like companions. They kind of work like these little like totems you get on your side, and they have like their 1 dice each and they roll it. And so you have another character who like works around like using those, and the more you like make and break throughout a match, he can get stronger. And like it was just, I was impressed by the amount of like characters that they came up with that all had unique things going on top of it already kind of being complex with being dice instead of cards. And like,
Hmm. Yeah, it sounds
man,
fresh. It sounds fresh compared to some of the other
yeah,
ones. You know, I think it's nice to find another really unique game. Like I thought Monster Train was the other one that stood out to me because
yeah,
I think with the floors and the kind of the positioning of your units was a really nice twist on Slay the Spire. And now replacing the cards with them, like having a more similar experience again, but with dice instead, sounds like a really nice switch up again. And man,
yeah.
I said it before too, but I really should play this. Like, God.
It is so good. Like I played it on a friend's recommendation, who really likes these style of games as well. And sometimes, pick up like a humble bundle, and the degree of quality can be quite different between them. It's become quite a prolific genre, and so that breeds,
Well, that's the
bigger
thing, right?
projects and also, smaller, less budget projects. But this one is like, it just kind of came out of nowhere, and it was so good. And like I feel like there was so much depth to how you can build these characters. And like, yeah, I think I've got like 16 hours in it or
Oh
something,
wow,
which
that's
is
a
like
lot.
quite a lot. Like I've played a lot. It's been my like hour before bed kind of like cozy. I'll just do a run. And
Are you playing
yeah,
it on your computer or what? Your
yeah,
Switch?
I've been playing it on Steam. It would make for a fantastic Switch game. I should have checked. I don't know if
Mm.
it's on there, but I've been playing it on
It is. I
Steam.
can see it's on Switch. Man, if I had this and Balatro on Switch, like how would I ever go to
Yeah,
sleep?
you just couldn't. I don't think you physically could. But yeah, it's crazy. It's still in beta, so like I'm assuming it's gonna get some more things added to it. I think it could use like a little bit more replayability once you've kind of beat it with all the characters. I've noticed that
Hmm.
since I've done that, the only really motivation to keep playing is like to, build a new deck because I haven't tried it yet, as opposed to like, so this bar's got the Ascension, or there's so many different things to
Hmm.
unlock. So um, that is kind of maybe the only sort of downside I felt in the game, is like I still want to play, I have the desire to play more, but not really like a tangible reward within the game to do so.
Yeah, that hook
But
is kind of missing now.
yeah, and so I kind of feel like, well, it would be a waste to play more even though I want to. So but again, it's in beta, so that's something that like maybe comes later down the pipeline. And then also, I think it's definitely worth getting for 16 hours of my time. Like I had a great time for those 16, and like not every game in this genre needs to be like 300 hours of Slay the Spire, and that's okay.
Well, that's because we have a sick problem. It's not because.
Exactly. Like my habits of getting obsessed with a game like this is not at all the game's fault. And if anything, it's doing me a favor by trying to limit me of how much I'm going to play it.
So, final question for you then: have you ever played Dicey Dungeons? Because
I
that's another
have
dice
played
dice kind
Dicey
of.
Dungeons.
It's different than this really, but I found Dicey
Yeah,
Dungeons actually pretty fun. I didn't stick with
I
it as
have.
long as some of the others,
Mhm.
but the way that you kind of get the different characters and they're rolling dice for different moves they can pull off, it's kind of similar-ish. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is a really good comparison, or Dicey Dungeon is a great game to bring up because I would say if you felt a little bit let down by Dicey Dungeons, this game will not have the same problem. I think Dicey Dungeons was really cute. I really had a good time playing it, but I felt that like it got very samey. Like a lot of the things that
Yeah.
you buy and the dice that you roll are kind of the same per character, and like you kind of just get to feel like there's a few items that are the best, and like you're rolling the dice, but the dice are just regular dice, and then you're like slotting them into equipment that like needs a six to use or something. Whereas this is like forget everything you know about dice. Like you will not see a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 the entire game. You're gonna see like crazy symbols that all have like breakdowns of like conditions and things they're gonna do, and like it's a lot more involved than something like Dicey Dungeons, even though that was a cute game and I don't hate dice.
Well, I'm glad about that, yeah, because I think you described Dicey Dungeons perfectly for me. Like, I liked it fine for what it was, and I played it for like 10 hours, and then I was pretty much done. This sounds a lot more like what I'm looking for.
This has a lot more depth to dig into, and I think Dicey Dungeons, like, it doesn't really feel like a deck builder. It's like kind of like
it's not a deck builder, yeah, it's a dice game.
It's like a dice game. Whereas this feels like a deck builder, but it's utilizing something unique about what dice can bring to the genre. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Gonna wishlist it on Steam now.
Yeah. And one more time, it is Astrea Six-Sided Oracle, because you will never remember that name.
No, I'll remember it now, because six-sided, six sides of a dice, like, we gotta remember that.
That's true. That part's cute, but the rest of it, like, they did not do themselves any favors with that title.
Well, Astrea Ascending is that other game that has a very similar title and, SEO. Anyway, interesting stuff. Good games today. I think we'll save the Fortnite chat for next time. We were gonna talk about the latest season, but maybe we'll save that for the next episode.
There's still a couple weeks left in it, so it's not going anywhere.
I think it's over soon. I think it's like this weekend.
Oh my god, we have to play. I don't even have I don't have Hades yet.
I'm telling you gotta just crush those quests. Listen to a podcast for an hour. Just get in there.
Yeah.
It's easy.
All right, I know what I'm doing with my morning off tomorrow.
Oh man. Okay, well, thank you all for listening to the podcast. That's going to wrap us up for today. Of course, if you want to get in touch or write in a listener mail episode or question for a future episode, you can do so down below. All of our links and stuff are down there. Check out all of these games if you're interested. I think we had some good hits, especially Pokemon. It's free. It's the easy one. Just go sign on there. Try it out. Please do. But until next time, this has been Cloud Control, the podcast that's not just good, it's good enough, and we'll see you next time.